Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Gabi Conacher, and I am co-founder of the DEE-P Connections, which is really focused on supporting and providing education for families who have kids that are really medically complex and have these kind of rare epilepsies or developmental and epileptic encephalopathies. And I'm super excited about the discussion we'll be having tonight. Just so folks know, if you are joining as an attendee, your camera is off, your sound is off, so you can be managing whatever you need to manage in the background. I will try not to change any diapers or do anything while I'm on camera. I tend to not do that, but it happens. That's our life, as you all know. But so we are recording this session, so it will be available on our website in the next week or so. And we look forward to having this as an ongoing resource for families to have a place to listen and feel reflected, your experience reflected back to you as someone who is on this journey of rare caregiving and really trying to figure out how to do some self-care along the way, which is not the easiest thing to do. So I'm going to hand it over to Anne, who is our host tonight, to take us off.
Thank you, Gabi. Hi, everyone. I'm Anne. I am from Connecticut. I have a little girl named Jordan, who's 2. When Jordan was 3 months old, she was diagnosed with focal seizures and infantile spasms. And about a month after, we found out that that was her refractory epilepsy, was part of developmental and epileptic encephalopathy. Just like many of our kids with DEEs, she has a number of disabilities, global developmental delays, CVI, hypotonia. After her diagnosis, I kind of scrambled to find communities of support. I was not right away that I looked to social media, where I eventually found a wonderful community on Instagram. But before that, I found DEE-P Connections, and I connected with Gabi, one of the first parents I connected to, and it was just a lifeline. And so I'm very grateful for DEE-P Connections, and I'm grateful to be able to participate in this and to be here with all of you. When we first started talking about this discussion, we kind of envisioned it like The View, the show The View, where we all would gather around this virtual table and engage in a dialogue, share kind of experiences, thoughts, perspectives. And when we met to prepare and plan for this, the conversation was so stimulating and so engaging. And so I think we're going to be in for a really, really fun discussion. Before we start that, I do want to turn it over to John, Haley and Bud, and have them introduce themselves briefly as well. So John, would you want to kick us off?
Certainly, be happy to. Well, welcome everybody. My name is John Scheinman. I live in Clearwater, Florida with my wife, Allison, and my twin girls, Haley and Libby, who are both 18 now. My daughter, Libby, is the one with a number of disabilities. She had her first seizure the day she was born, and continued to go down that path of diagnoses of epilepsy and cerebral palsy, and a number of other cognitive disabilities, and she can't walk or talk, and she's in a wheelchair. I'm not that old, but I'm kind of grandfather here. I mean, it's been 18 years for me now, and when we first started looking for help online, Facebook wasn't even around at that point. And so we had to just try and find people through other means. So it was really challenging, and we felt alone and isolated, like so many people do even today, but it was even a little bit harder back then. The journey has been really difficult. We've learned a lot. My daughter Libby's been through multiple brain surgeries, still continues to have seizures, even though she's had a hemispherectomy and is still taking 5 anti-seizure medications. But I'll tell you, I mean, these kids have a heart of gold. She is pure joy. Her smile is infectious. She has inspired a number of different initiatives that have really made a difference across the country. And I'm just so happy to be her dad. She keeps me fighting every day, and I will never stop until I find something that can help her even better. So I'm really thrilled to be here tonight and have this great conversation with amazing people and with all of you. And I hope we can get some really good discussion going and some good answers. And I'll pass it on.
Thanks, John. Haley, yeah. Would you like to go
Sure,
ahead?
I'll jump in. So my name is Haley Atkinson, and I am in Salem, Oregon, and I have a blended family. So I have a stepson that's 12, and I have a son that is 8 in a couple of days. And then I have my daughter, Juniper, who's almost 3.5, which is, the one that we thought third child, it would be a piece of cake. And she said, not a chance, and has given us a run for our money. She was diagnosed with infantile spasms at about 6 months. In hindsight, some seizure activity probably started a little bit before that, but what brought us into the hospital was some very clear spasms, seizures at 6 months old. And this August, it'll be 3 years since then. And she still has, it's a good day if she only has one cluster of seizures. So she still has daily seizures. Has gone through, I last count, 15 different medications, 2 brain surgeries, a VNS implant, various holistic treatments. And while epilepsy is a very dominating piece of our life, we've kind of moved into this, okay, we're not going to cure her, so how do we manage? And what is kind of our bench line for what we're working towards now, which is very, very different than where I was 3 years ago, when the only goal was stopping it at all cost. So that's me. I'll pass it on to Bud.
Yeah, unmuted. Thank you, Haley, John, and Gabi. Thank you so much for having us all here. Similar stories. I think we're going to hear a lot of that, a lot of connections between all of us. So our daughter Emma was diagnosed with infantile spasms around 6 months, but there were definitely things happening before that, which, in hindsight, looking back, we can see that, oh yeah, that's what that was. And again, that's probably going to be another thing that's going to come up, is that benefit, but then also curse of hindsight of looking back at knowing what we know now. But we'll get to that in the conversation. So again, my name is Bud. My daughter Emma is diagnosed with something called pachygyria, which is a brain malformation. And as a result of that, has been just a slew of things have come from that, epilepsy being one of them, which is similar to Haley, in what Haley just said. It was sort of our chief concern for a very long time, that was the target. And also similar to Haley, we're sort of in a place where, like, okay, we need to start looking at what happens in between the seizures a little bit more. That was actually something our neurologist said to us, was, her brain is her brain. And so we need to start looking at things in between that. So alternative treatments, including things like palliative care and that sort of stuff, which is where we're at now with Emma. So I'm excited to learn all these fun, new, exciting ways for self-care and asking for help from these other experts in here. And I'm just really happy to be involved and that everyone is here with us. Welcome, everyone.
And maybe I'll quickly say, because I did the opening, but I didn't introduce myself as a mom. So I am mom to Elliot, who is 10 and has SCN8A DEE. I also have a 7-year-old Vega, who is a wonderful sister and caregiver. But Elliot, I started DEEP Connections because of my experience with Elliot, because it felt so incredibly isolating and scary to have a kid who was really, really medically complex. He's 10 and is still requires, everything to be done for him. And, sees probably 15 different subspecialists, lots of seizures, severe hypotonia. But, I think others have reflected as well that these kids are just so resilient and patient and beautiful and amazing. And, I feel really lucky to be his mom and to be a part of this community of people who are fighting every day to be the voice for their kids and give them the best quality of life. And I think that I am someone who really needs help in this department. I am terrible at self-care. So I look forward to having the conversation with all these panelists, but also hearing from all of you who are on the call. Please, as we're going through, use the chat, use the Q&A, and share what works for you, what challenges you have, and have it be a conversation. So thanks, Anne, for hosting us today.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask the first question. Before I do just want to make a note of the fact that our experiences are our experiences. And so there's so many things that we're going to have in common and identify and relate, and there may be some differences. And we also want to hold space for the fact that our experiences and how we navigate them are going to be largely based on, who we are, our identities, our cultures, our beliefs, our resources, which include, time and finances, even our geographic location, where we're located, the resources and services in our area, and our ability to access them. And so throughout the conversation, I have no doubt there's going to be a lot of, yes, I get that, and similarities and identifications, and where there are differences, just holding space for that, and taking away what you find helpful and what you like and what you need for the night. So with that, I'm going to open it up to the first question, which I am very much realizing now that the first question right out of the gate is quite loaded. So we'll just roll with it. But in our community, self-care can really be a hot button topic. It can elicit a lot of thoughts, a lot of feelings when it comes up. Why do you think that is? And what makes self-care such a sensitive area for us as parents and caregivers?
I'll take it first, if you like. This is such an interesting question. We know that we need to take care of ourselves, right? People tell us you've got to get time away, you've got to think about things, you've got to exercise, you've got to sleep. Now there was a sleep study done not too long ago that says if you get between 6 and 8 hours of sleep a night, then you'll live between like 2 and 5 years longer. So I think, well, I never get that much sleep per night, even if I try. And I mean, between that and between having to exercise and to eat well, and it's just one of those things where we plan and we try to do these things, but our situation gets in the way. As an example, last night, my daughter Livy was in bed. She wakes up at 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning. I get up on with her, I feed her early, and then I usually go to the gym in the morning. Well, okay, so now do I go back to bed? Do I go to the gym and do I try and be healthy that way? And so I went to the gym. So now I'm healthy and tired all day long. So it's like these things, we know we're supposed to do these things, but it's never that simple, I guess is the answer.
Yeah, I think, to kind of what you alluded to, Anne, I think that, prefacing this discussion and all of our experiences, I think one thing that I've really become aware of is, two things. One, self-care, what does it mean? Inherently, it's taking care of yourself, right? And that can look a lot of different ways. I think it can be a trigger to a parent of a medically complex kid, because especially if you're given that as a solution, like don't forget to practice self-care, right? Kind of this eye roll, because it's a privilege to be able to practice self-care, and privilege to include like not just, monetary resources, but time and trusted caregivers. So to me, saying, well, get out of the house and go get a massage. Well, one, that's alluding to privilege of having finances, but two, it's saying you need to have someone that you can trust to take care of your child. And that is very specific. I think about single parents. I think about even 2-parent households, if one's working and the other one's not, but even if you qualify, Oregon, we qualify for a lot of direct support professionals, but it's a service desert. So just because you have the hours doesn't mean you have someone that can actually take care of your child. So one is recognizing that self-care is not as simple as just leaving the house and going get in a massage. But I think the other thing to me is when people say self-care is like taking a shower and eating, to me, that's basic necessities. And I think it's really important we don't confuse self-care with basic necessities of survival and functioning and hygiene. Me getting a shower every few days, yes, it might feel really good, but that's not self-care. That's just how I'm surviving day to day. And so I think for me, the eye roll comes to when people think it's just, oh, go for a run or go get a massage. And I go, great. It's not that simple. And realizing that medical parenting and being a parent caregiver is very different than being able to just call up a babysitter to come over or have any family member come over and watch your child, because there's a lot of complexity involved.
100%. And Haley, even as you were talking, I was just mindful too of like the guilt that can come from that. Cause I do love to run, and that's one of mine. You know, I do that for my mental health. I talk about that a lot, but I will often feel guilt, you know, when I leave, because I should be attending to Jordan or I should be taking care of her. So I absolutely, you know, both you and John, I agree with. And I will also say though, with the shower bombs, kind of nice, you know, bringing those in, a little music. I find myself in a shower a lot longer these days.
Yeah, a nice hot one. I mean, I think the idea of guilt too, like that's something that I think around this too, that it's not just, it's the guilt of leaving, but it's the guilt of feeling like I should be doing something, right? So, oh, you really have to take time for yourself. And it's like, it's another should, right? Like how many shoulds can I have in my life and, you know, feel guilty about them? And so I know I should do it more, but it's, you know, finding the stars have to align for it all to happen, right? And so then it's another thing to feel bad about, like, oh, I really should be doing that, but I can't because, you know, to even leave my son Elliot with somebody requires a lot of training, right? He's very positional. If he's not in the right position, he's not breathing right. If he's not breathing right, then he, you know, desaturates, then he desaturates, you know, it's like this cascade of things that can happen. And we've had it happen before where we, you know, on a whim, not on a whim, but like, you know, make the call that like, okay, we're going to try to do this. And then, you know, we get called home because he's in crisis. And then that's a visit to the ICU and an intubation and an aspiration pneumonia. And it's like, there are real consequences to stepping away when your kid requires 24-hour care and is really medically complex. So to me, it's been about also trying to figure out how to build the community around us, which hasn't happened really, you know, like when Elliot was little, I mean, now he's almost like he's 4.5 feet tall and 65 pounds and, you know, has to be moved. He can't do anything for himself. So my parents used to help when he was little, but you know, they're like in their 80s now. I can't expect to leave them and have them be able to, you know, care for him in the way that he needs to be cared for. So another layer.
I think I want just something real quick in the chat, Stephanie. I want to make sure that Stephanie, we can see the chat, so I want to address what you said about when we go out, our mind. It's not like just because we aren't around our children anymore that we suddenly like, oh, like it's like not there anymore, so I can just go do this thing. And that fits in exactly what you were saying, Gabi, as well as Haley. The idea that it's not just a financial or a time luxury, it's also like a cognitive luxury, to have this sort of like compartmentalization. Going back to the original question, and about like why is it such a hot button topic, other than like what self-care actually is, which we'll get into, but I think like that is the problem, is that we all, I think, like define self-care differently. You know, within the community and without the community, but also, you know, just amongst ourselves. Like I define it differently than my wife does. And so when somebody says, hey, you guys should do some self-care, it's like, okay, well, who's, I mean, so, and like what we're able to do is very different. So that, I think, it gets hung up a lot when people say you should do self-care. And it's always like, well, what do you mean by that? So it becomes sort of a point of contention, in that, okay, well, so like my idea of self-care is not you coming over and giving me a break from Emma. There's never been like a form of self-care where I actually want to be separate from Emma. Like that's not, to me, is not self-care, which is, again, shows that like I define it differently than most people. The idea that self-care seems to be relegated to taking a break. So it's like self-care equals break. So whatever you do on that break is up to you. If it's a shower, if it's a run, if it's coffee, but it must be a break. And I disagree with that. I think self-care is something that you can attain while you're in the situation, which is that difference of definition, where somebody who doesn't have a child like ours, who requires, I mean, really 24/7 care, somebody who is able to, you know, go to the bathroom in the morning and not have to leave the door open so you can hear a seizure in the room, or, you know, bring them into the bathroom with you with their chair so they can watch you shower because you have to keep an eye on them. Somebody whose life isn't like that, there's really like this sort of like, they can't even get across the divide to understand what that's like. So for them, yeah, self-care, it's not, I'm not saying that their definition is wrong, it's just different. So for them, self-care is leaving. Whereas for me, self-care will be something that's going to help me dig in, because I'm in already. So I don't want to, leave Emma in order to take care of myself, because so much of myself is wrapped up into being her caregiver. So for me, like I said, it's a hot button item is because I define it differently. And especially when it gets down to that, like I've talked to so many people where, we'll talk about self-care, and it seems like we even define what a self is differently and what care is differently. So how can we say self-care when we don't even know what a self is or how to care for it? So really the conversation has to go all the way back to that fundamentals of, well, what is this thing that we are supposedly caring for? And what does that even look like? The form and function of self-care is become just like a platitude. It's become, that phrase of self-care has become just something that people sort of lay on top of their well wishes, sort of like, have a good life and take care of yourself. And that's sort of like, there's this idea like, well, I feel good because I made sure that they knew that I was thinking about them taking care of themselves. And like, that's where it stops. So it's so difficult to actually get into that thing. So there you go. Sorry, I just saw Aaron in the chat as well.
Yeah.
What makes you feel most like it? Yeah, I agree with that as well. That's so like when I define it, it's like when I was talking with Maggie and when I do it in therapy and stuff, self-care is whatever's going to augment your being in the world. So however you are being now in this world, self-care is when you augment that. So it could, like for me, that's how I define it. So it could be a run. It will never be a run for me, but I understand for other people that might be running. But it could be, it could be doing research. It could be laying on the bed with Emma. But if it's something that's going to take you out of being yourself, like having a yelling match with people on social media or by self-destructive habits, whatever that happens to be, that can't be self-care because it's not going to augment yourself. Just because it feels good is not the same as you feeling you, if that makes sense. And now I'm rambling. Sorry, I'm all excited. I realize there's other people in here.
I love this. And I actually have to tell you, even when I was listening to you talk about that, I remember in the beginning completely losing myself. I was completely consumed 24/7, constantly on edge, constantly hypervigilant, constantly watching Jordan every second of every day. I kind of lost myself. And so I love that you brought that in. And I love that framing of self-care is thinking about, what is self? And just even looking at the chat, I can see very quickly a lot of people really resonate with that. And I agree, you are not rambling. So I love that. So I mean, even with that in mind, like what is then self-care for you? Like what works?
Someone else want to take this since I just rambled, even though I didn't, but I did. John, this is all you.
I was going to say that you have to even be in the right state of mind for self-care sometimes. And I say that because I work out at the gym pretty frequently as a means of either blowing off steam or I just think. And I go there and I'm just able to think and not have to think about all the other things that are going on. But when Livy was in the hospital, I was angry. Like I left the hospital and I was angry. So I went to the gym and I was mad. I was not in a state of mind to say, this is going to be good for me. I had to release. And so, I mean, I guess to some extent that's a form of self-care because I needed that at that moment. But you kind of have to almost be free to step away and to Buzz's point, I mean, you can never really step away too much because you're always thinking about what's coming next. But you have to be open to self-care. And that can be really tough because I think a lot of times, to your point, as we discussed, the guilt sets in too. It's like, should I, my child is going through all these things and I'm going to try and go off and just have self-care, right? And that can be hard to separate yourself from the caregiver role. And so I guess it's, working out for me is a good thing in most cases, but I mean, there's other things too. I mean, I'm sure you all have your ways of either venting or just sort of feeling better. I'd be curious to see what else you think.
Yeah, I think for me, it's evolved. What I need, so self-care for me has been similar, John, to what you said, but this idea of what I needed when my daughter was diagnosed is very different than what I need now for self-care. When she was newly diagnosed, self-care for me was staying in bed all day for 2 weeks. Like I could not function. I was so immensely depressed that if you would have said, actually people did say, get up out of bed and go for a walk. Like I didn't want to feel better right then. Like I didn't, it's this very bizarre thing to explain unless you've experienced like depression or something sort of trauma. I didn't want to feel good. And it was actually more painful when I tried. Like I remember, getting outside and just hating it because in that moment, I just needed to stay in bed and like be a puddle for a little while. And then, if I tried to rush that process, I remember early on, I think my mom was watching our daughter. We had like a date night for one night, and it was early on in diagnosis. It was like a couple hours. And my husband's like, let's go. We're going to go to dinner. We're going to do this. We're going to get you in clothes, not in your sweatpants, and go. And I spent the whole time crying. And I said, I am so uncomfortable trying to have dinner and have a conversation when we are in the pits of hell right now. I can't, like, it's this weird dichotomy. I can't do this. And we can, like, that's great. If we have a moment where we can get out and go have dinner, we do that. But at that time, I was not in a place where that was what I needed for self-care. And so I think for me, what I do has really evolved and changed. And, just like grief, I don't believe it's linear. Like we can jump backwards too. Some days I still go and I just need to lay in bed for a little bit. Other days I'm like, I'm going to go for a run because that feels good. I took up a lot of weird hobbies to distract myself. Every time, this has been 4 times, my daughter had a steroid treatment. We joked that I had a house project. Everything from like packing up our entire house and moving to putting together an IKEA shelf to building bunk beds all by myself. Like my husband said, I'm like an ant. Like how I managed to do that, I don't know. But for me, having a distraction when things are really difficult has been what works for me. But other times I don't need a distraction. I just need to feel whatever I'm feeling. So one thing I will say that was immensely helpful was for me, self-care was being really intentional with therapy. When I was in a really bad place, prioritizing and setting aside that hour a week to meet with a trauma therapist, because I couldn't get to that point of wanting to like go for a hike or have a date night until I worked through a lot of yuck. So point being, it's evolved and it's changed, but one thing that was really good and necessary for me was therapy, and also puzzles. I did a lot of puzzles and I really liked house plants for a while.
For a while, did they all die?
Now, no, we still have them, but I'm not as into it as I was like a year and a half ago.
Yeah, I want to honor what you said, because I think it's so important to recognize that like sometimes you just need to be in it. And that was me in the beginning too. Like I would force myself to, because Elliot's diagnosis was really early on. So he was just this teeny little baby, and you're struggling with breastfeeding and like a diagnosis, and actually not a diagnosis in the beginning, was like, what is this? We don't know. And you know what? I kept pushing myself to do things that I thought were the right thing to do. I was like, I'm going to take a walk and I'm going to go like, and then I would walk by a park and I would just be a disaster, because I would see all of these people who have kids that are running and playing and laughing and like what I thought I was going to have. And I knew that that's not what I was going to have. And I kept doing it because I thought that was what I was supposed to do, right? You're supposed to go for walks and you're supposed to be out and get some sun, but it just like, it was horrible and it made things worse. And so I really reverted to being back inside for a while, and I probably did it for too long. I probably let myself sit in it too long and like didn't really recognize that now this is a depression and you need to come out of it. I eventually did, but I think honoring that, like what you think you're supposed to do may not really be it, and to like pay attention to that and recognize that and sit in it, and then trying to process like what is the right next step. And I think therapy is like, that's never the wrong choice unless it really feels terrible to you. So I just wanted to echo that and say that, especially early in the journey. I think there's just this mourning that we have to go through, right? And it's not just in the beginning. It's like throughout, every time a milestone is missed, every time, we're in the hospital, every time we have a status event, every time we have another pneumonia, it's like it resets, right? Like maybe it'll be different after that. And maybe when you're in that, you need something different. So I'll let somebody else. I don't know, John, if you want to weigh in on this one.
Oh, but do you have a recommendation?
I just like so many things in my head. There's so much good being thrown at me in a good way. So I'm trying to think that, like, you had said something, it's like, okay. And then Haley went, she had said something, and then Gabi just said something. But just really quickly going in both to what it said about that, the evolution of self-care. I think that's really important. And I think that's really tough to get across in a lot of the mediums that we interact in. Because on social media, when you see that person, you're seeing them at that post. You were seeing me when I posted that story. And so it's really difficult. You're getting just a snapshot. It is like a completely mediated experience of reality. So it's difficult, say, like when new people, newly diagnosed families come in and they're like, wow, look how good John is doing. Oh my gosh, like, why am I not there yet? And then John has to remind you, I've been doing this 18 years. Like, my self-care is going to look very different than yours. And then vice versa, when you're a parent who's been doing this for a long time and you see a new parent going through like every stage all at once, like in a day, and you're like, whew, like, I remember those days. That was a lot. It's sort of like, I picture my head. So I come from a really large family. There's 10 kids in my family. So the sibling thing is really big for me. And I sort of picture it like, big siblings, little siblings. Like when you see your little sibling doing something that you recently just did a few years ago, but you're like, don't do that. Like, just wait, or do this differently. Like that perspective of hindsight really comes in. But just because people who know that I like words, I'm a word nerd. And so not many people are really aware, but the root of the word care actually is sorrow. That's where that comes from. And so when you look at self-care, really what you're saying is self-sorrow. And so when Haley's point about, I was depressed and that's where I was. I needed to be in bed. That was my self-care. I think we get sort of wrapped up in things always have to be looking up. Everything has to be progressing. So self-care should be something that makes you better, right? It should be something that makes you happy. It should be something that makes you feel good. And laying in bed in like depressed soup is not something that most people are like, this feels great. But if you look at what the evolution of that word care, what it actually is self-care is acknowledging that sorrow. It's acknowledging, like we said, who you are. And if right at that moment you are sad and you are depressed and you are just, like your existence is compressed into this moment, then that's where you need to be. That is your self-care, is allowing yourself to be authentic in that. It's really tough and it sucks all of the time when you have to do it. And that's where something like therapy comes in, is you're like, okay, I can't forever exist like this. And I can't climb up this mountain because I've never been on this mountain before. So that's where therapy sort of comes in, where you have somebody who isn't like at the top of the mountain. Therapists aren't people who have like made it. I can say this personally because I happen to be a therapist, and everyone in this chat knows that. But for those of you who don't know, I am a therapist. So therapy, and this is something I discuss with every single one of my clients. It's not me on top of the mountain telling you what to do. It's me climbing my own mountain. I've got my own stuff. But from my mountain, I have this vantage point that maybe you can't see. I can see things along your path. And so I can help you with that, help you sort of guide that. And I think I absolutely agree with therapy as a form of self-care. It's another thing that I think gets tricky because nowadays there's this trend of like everything is therapy. The gym is my therapy. I'm not calling you out, John, just example. The gym is my therapy, or social media is my therapy, or reading books is my therapy. And as a therapist, like, no, like therapy is therapy. Those other things can be cathartic, absolutely. And they absolutely can be things that can help you connect with yourself. But therapy is like a specific process. So the reason why I bring this up is I have people who I recommend, I'm like, hey, therapy would be great for you. They're like, yeah, I know, I read books all the time and that's my therapy. And I was like, that's great that you read books. You also should do therapy though. Like that should be a thing you do. So absolutely recommend therapy as a form of self-care where you are getting this sort of guidance, again, not as a form of this person is healed and I'm the broken one, but as like we're sort of all, travelers, we're all fellow journeymen. If you therapist, there hopefully will be somebody who will go that route with you. And if you don't connect with your therapist, no harm, no foul. Get a different therapist. There's lots of us. I mean, there are good ones, there are bad ones. That, again, that's a personal opinion, not a professional one. But please, if you are going to therapy and it is not working, don't ghost your therapist. Have that conversation. That's a really important conversation to have with a therapist. But also, don't give up on yourself. You deserve that. You deserve to have somebody that you can, connect with, somebody who actually will sit with you in your quiddity, who will do that with you. And I, once again, I've lost like the point of this, but like things that you do that I wanted to touch back on what Haley said about that, being depressed. That's an important part of your self-care. Spending all of your energy to not be depressed is not self-care. It's acknowledging, where you are. That's why I say it's something that's going to augment who you are in the world. That's what self-care is. It's the augmentation of yourself.
One of the things that I love about what has been said too is one of my favorite sayings is be where your feet are, which is just, for some people that might get an eye roll, totally okay. But I really like that because, and it kind of fits with the sorrow piece and the grief piece. I remember once, feeling really sorry for myself and feeling guilty and a little bit shameful and embarrassed that I was feeling so sorry for myself. And I had to have someone tell me that it's okay. Feel sorry for yourself, embrace it, feel it. And then when you're ready, keep going. And I found that to be incredibly helpful, incredibly validating, and really helped me to be able to move, because I think we have to be where we are. And for me, when I fight it and I try to change it and I try to, force something, it tends to make it worse for myself. Just kind of engages and creates that struggle. So, and I do also think, that idea of what I needed then, similar to what Haley and Bud and John and Gabi have said, is that what I needed in the beginning, what I need now are different. And for me, I have been very grateful for the connections and the relationships that I found on Instagram. And I know Bud referenced kind of those snapshots, those points in time. And that can be a really helpful thing. I think for me, when I found Instagram, I found other people living a similar journey who could also show me what it was like, because I had no idea. I had no picture. I had no image. We're not socialized for the rare. And so I didn't know how to navigate any of this. And for me, finding that and seeing examples of how I might be able to navigate was incredibly helpful. And I think very healing in a lot of ways. And so because we talk about how lonely and isolating this can be, how have you all navigated, finding communities of support and connecting in meaningful ways with others? Who wants to take it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I keep going first. I don't want to step on anyone's toes. First, I want to say, Bud, do you accept Venmo or PayPal? Because I think this session we're going to have to pay you a little bit extra for this one.
You get the epilepsy discount.
Nice.
Which is free. Nice. You can chat with me anytime you want to.
I mean, as I had mentioned too, social media wasn't as prevalent when we first started going through the journey. We found, first of all, we created sort of our own group locally, either through other families that went to who's had kids who went to school with my daughter Livy. Because they needed the community as well. And so there were a lot of families who were going through a similar journey, and we sort of all bonded together, and we met on a regular basis. But I always tell my daughter Haley that if there's something out there that you need and it's not there, you have to build it. And so we did that with our group. Eventually we did. We found people online. Facebook groups, of course, have been amazing. Some of them are hit or miss, but it's finding the one that is most appropriate for the needs that you have, whether it's a similar life situation with location, or finding a family who's got a similar child as you do. People come and go out of those groups for obvious reasons, and they evolve, like we've been talking about. You evolve, your needs over time evolve, and so you may not need them eventually again. But it's important to find those people. everyone feels alone at first. And so it's really important to find those people, whether it is online or whether it is in person, whether it is through a support group, through an organization. But it's definitely important in a way of relieving some of the anxiety and stress of finding out what others have done.
Yeah, I think for me, I will speak to the social media piece. But like many things in the past few years, it's evolved and changed based on what I need in that moment. And early on, sitting in the hospital with my daughter's diagnosis, the Facebook group for infantile spasms was what I needed. But how I utilized it is how many newly diagnosed families utilize it, saying, please share the success stories, right? That's what I wanted. I wanted to see my child will be fine. Show me the children that will be fine. And this is going to be merely a blip in her life. And I joke and said, it'll be an inspirational thing she can put on her college applications. Like when we look back at this. And slowly, as we realized she was not going to be, it depends on how you define success, right? Like, I think she's phenomenal and has exceeded expectations of things. But if you look at success of what I was looking for, of a cured child who is at the top of their class, that is not who Juniper is. That is not who she will ever be. And slowly I found that group, I had outgrown it. And it was very isolating. And then I turned to Instagram and I found families that I felt like I could relate to more. And the beauty of social media is you can choose who you want to follow and who you don't. And that can change and evolve as well. And I think for me locally, so I live in the Pacific Northwest, there's not a huge population and we don't really have local support groups for epilepsy. We do, but what I learned when I tried one, it was during COVID, so they weren't meeting face-to-face. Two, for the Pacific Northwest, it involves Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Alaska. So a big group, right? And three, I very quickly learned when I was having conversations about this that I wouldn't get what I needed from that group. So for example, I think all grief is valid. I think it's important to preface and recognize that. But I didn't want to sit in a room with parents who were mourning that because of their child's epilepsy diagnosis, they may not be able to get their driver's license at 16. I was mourning that my child may not be able to live until she's 16. And so it's not that their grief isn't valid. It was just very different than what I was experiencing. And in fact, triggering and worse for me being a part of that. And so I found community with families that I felt like I could be vulnerable with, that I could connect with, that I had some similarities with personally, as well as with my daughter. And that has been a huge anchor of support for me, as well as eventually being able to provide support to other families as well. That's been really fulfilling to me to have that as an outlet. But recognizing, just like your self-care changes, the community that you need is going to change and evolve over time too. And actually the best support we've found locally has been from our local cerebral palsy group. So nothing to do with epilepsy, though many of the kids have epilepsy. It's been purely focused on cerebral palsy because there's so many reasons that a child has a cerebral palsy diagnosis, and not all, but many also have epilepsy.
Yeah, I'll just call out that I think in the chat, there's a lot of great stuff coming in here. And I see Ryan talking about perspective has helped so much. And I think that's so spot on. And I think that's kind of what you were just talking about, Haley, right? It's like, this week in a private support group that we have for SCN8A, one mom said, I've just accepted where I am. And like everything changed for her, recognizing that like, I'm not going to try to hope for and mourn constantly for what I don't have, but be grateful for, what the beautiful child that I have is and what they can do and what they're learning to do and what they are. And I think that's the perspective piece is so important, because if we're constantly in mourning, and we need to spend our time there, but like, you can't appreciate how amazing and incredible our kids are, right? Because they all are in their own way. And, some of them it's that they can smile, some that it's they, are meeting these inch stones of progress and able to learn new things and try new things. But I think it's so important to find that mindset. And as like Min said also about, avoiding your triggers. I think that's so incredibly important too, that, I went to one of those support groups too, where, early on I went to an epilepsy support group and it was people talking about, oh my gosh, I'm so scared my kid's going to college and I can't control their medication anymore. And for me, it was very triggering also. It's like, my kid is in the hospital nonstop and, in the code room. And it's like, that's not what's working for me. So, I think for me, what I'll say briefly is just that what is, my community has been in finding like activism and taking action and doing something that for me has felt like put me in a position of control where everything else in my life is out of my control, it feels like. So for me, that's been about, trying to build spaces and places and join spaces of places where there's people who have shared energy and drive and passion. And I think that can be really powerful to find a community that wants to drive something forward together and work towards something better for our kids and our families. So, yeah.
I want to augment. I don't know why that's like my word for the day, I guess. I want to augment something that Haley said. Because and this is something that Haley and I have talked about separately in chats and texts and stuff, but that idea that all grief is valid. And I really want to make sure everyone hears this, because sometimes, especially for newer families, there's this sort of idea that, we come off as, yes, all grief is valid, but like my grief is valider. And I that is absolutely not what we're saying here. That it sometimes feels that way because, we have so much to talk, so much grief, like that clearing in the forest of our life is such a big one that there's so much to discuss. But it's just echoing what Haley said. That's not what this is. This isn't like my problems are bigger, my problems are harder. It's, suffering is suffering, but I have to find, where I can connect and where I can plug in with someone else's suffering. So absolutely that sort of evolution of just like we talked about self-care, like you said, your evolution of your community changes. I think it's important to keep in mind that shared community, shared experiences does not a community make. Like that's not the only thing that you can have. So it's like, hey, you have epilepsy, I have epilepsy. Obviously, we're best friends, and it's just a very surface way of looking. That's a great place to start because you probably have a higher likelihood of it. But you really, like John said, you really have to end up building this, especially when you have kids like ours, where you're like, I want to connect with somebody who has my child's, genetic mutation. Like crickets, or, I have an undiagnosed child. Where do I even look with that? Like Haley said, you have to try to find what you can. So like she's with the cerebral palsy group and that's what you do. So for me, about like going back to Anne, your question about navigating, it did start, like with social media, because that's like, it's social media, right? So you're looking for that sort of society. So you type in a few hashtags and you find a few people, and it's great because that's what you need at that moment is like, there's like other humans who exist with this. And so you sort of like get into that. And then for me personally, I know it doesn't seem like it, but I'm extremely introverted, and the idea of like that like just massive communication is very, it's just not my cup of tea. I prefer very much more to connect one-on-one. And so what usually ends up happening is we connect with these people, and then typically it's the dads, I get their cell phone numbers, and then we chat individually. So like right now, if you see like this sort of happening, it's because I'm on my phone and those exact dads are texting me while we're in this. So they're listening and they're texting me. So shout out to Big D and Little D. Thank you for listening to this. But that's kind of what it is, John. Is that like, so you have this group, but then now I have this smaller group that we have to sort of build. And that's sort of that's your task in this. That's the project of what it is to be a parent of a child like this, or to be yourself somebody going through this, is that the expectation that there will be a community there waiting for you, in my experience, has not happened. So the idea is you can build this community along the way. And that's really just such a more like rich and fulfilling experience, because the community is what you need. And most likely what has happened with me, that's a community, the one that you build is the community that evolves with you. So like this group of dads that I was talking about, we talk about, the different meds that our kids are on, and hey, has your kid ever done this? Or, at 2 a.m, we're like, yep, we're up, we're doing this, but it's not just that. We sort of evolved. We've talked more about us as humans and then how we exist as dads specifically. And it's one that goes with you. So that navigation is just that. It's not a destination, is that we're navigating this. You're constantly on this flow. I mean, until one day you won't be, like one day none of us will have to navigate this anymore, but that's probably a webinar for another time when we get to that. But while you are here, that is your task. Your task is to navigate this, or someone else will navigate it for you. And you probably won't like the way that they go. So I know it's hard, but like that digging into this and navigating that. And like, so one way that we have tried to build this, both my wife and I, is as much as I don't like the big groups of people chatting with, like I said, one-on-one is great. We're always very open to share like our phone numbers or emails. Like when we're at hospital visits with the doctors, we always say, hey, if you got somebody coming in, a new parent, please give them, give them my cell number. I'll be happy to text with them. At her therapy places, I don't like actually have a business card because it's 2023, but like I've left my number and been like, hey, leave my number, give it to whoever wants to connect with that. And actually, another shout out, Ryan in the chat. Ryan Sheedy is another one of the dads that we sort of connect with. I'm so happy to see you here, Ryan. But that's what I mean. You have these sort of personal connections that you then bring into this community, and that's the only way that I've been able to navigate it, is to build that community, like John said.
I really like that idea of building the community and going out and find it. And throughout the chat too, and as we've been going, I saw kind of repeatedly people put in about finding, and we've talked about it, as a group, but finding what works for us in the moment, paying attention to ourselves and whatever that means, whether it is taking space and separating, whether it is finding ourselves within, all of our responsibilities and all the things that we have going on. I think, it, as has been said, it looks so different for everybody. And it's a lot of self exploration and reflection and introspection and figuring out what we need and when. And I really love the piece about going out and finding community and creating it. Haley, I never would have thought to look for other, groups, like even a CP, community, with shared experiences, because there have been times where I have even myself identified more with the disability community, despite the fact that Jordan continues to have, seizures on a regular basis. The disabilities have felt like they have separated from other forms of epilepsy, with that encephalopathy. So,
and I'll add real fast, because this is something I didn't know before, that many states have a cerebral palsy organization, and they've been specifically great, not necessarily for like the emotional connection, though I have gotten that, but navigating resources. Like nobody knows how to navigate resources like someone who's had a child for 20 years with CP in your state. And so they have been the ones that have been like, here's how you need to answer the internet question or the interview questions when you're doing an assessment. And so I encourage anyone listening to check, if they haven't already, if your child obviously has a CP diagnosis, to check and see if you have a state group, because they have incredibly knowledgeable.
That's a great resource. Yeah, thank you. I'm mindful of the time, and as anticipated, this has gone so fast. It has been so stimulating and so engaging. I do want to see if, just in the few minutes we have left, if there are specific questions. I know, Ryan, I saw yours in here, navigating all of this with partners and spouses. And I have to tell you, when I saw that come through, I thought, you just gave us the next deep discussion topic. So thank you for that. That is a big one. And I think there'd be a lot of similarities and identifications. I don't know if anyone wants to share their experience. I feel like that is a big question. Anyone want to kind of tackle navigating the world with spouses?
Do it, John. Lead us in.
Yeah, that's a whole webinar in itself, because it's really complicated, but really, really important. And this journey is not easy by yourself. And if you and a partner or a wife or a spouse, husband, if you're not working as a team, it really complicates the matter. And I think but I'm sure knows this as well too, and has probably seen with his patients, that people handle trauma and grief differently. And it can cause real challenges. It can cause challenges with how you process just the diagnosis, about how life has changed, about what treatment should be given. And my wife Alice and I, we used to argue about medications all the time. I didn't want to give Livy as much, and she wanted to give her more. And so now we meet in the middle and we compromise a lot better, because we've just had experience, and we know when we need to compromise better. But it was really hard in the beginning. And I mean, that's the evolution that you go through too. And it's unfortunate some couples don't make it, but the ones that do, they don't take each other for granted. They know that they're in a really difficult position, and if they work better together, then their child will be the benefit, but also their relationship will benefit.
Thank you for sharing that, John. And I do think too that this would be a really great deep discussion, because I know I've talked to so many folks about navigating that in terms of grief, in terms of care, in terms of communication, connection. It's so layered, and there are so many things. I am so grateful for each and every one of you and for all of your time tonight. This has been a wonderful conversation. I hope everyone has found it really helpful and engaging, like I have. I do want to let folks know that we want to continue these conversations. We want to continue to find ways to engage community, to create connection. So we're hoping to have many more of these, deep discussions. And then we're also going to follow this one up specifically with a community chat. So it'll be, we have to get together, convene amongst ourselves, and figure out the date and the times that work. But we're going to let people know through all of our channels, our Instagrams, and Facebook, Twitter, all the things, what that date and time will be, but would love to come together and keep this conversation going outside of a webinar platform. So it would be a Zoom, not recorded, where people can come in and engage with each other in conversation. This is also being recorded, and it's going to be posted to our website. On our website, under the resource tab, there are a number, over 70, probably 72 plus now, webinars that are available for folks to watch. And so this will be posted and shared there as well when it's ready. Gabi, is there anything else that you would like to add?
No, I'm so grateful that this group was willing to come together, and thank you, Anne, for curating this community to be together and to share their experiences. And, we really look forward to having more in-depth conversation with all of you. We hope that you'll come and have a chance to be more present and give your thoughts. This is kind of a newer direction for Deep Connections. We've always really wanted to have more opportunities to build connection. And we're hoping it's something that you guys found useful and that you want to be a part of. So we're going to be playing with this and putting some more stuff out there. And please give us some feedback. Drop in the chat if you've had thoughts throughout about how this has gone for you. Please email us at info@deepconnections.net if you have ideas or thoughts. I didn't have I had a survey ready, but it's not working now. So I was going to ask you guys to fill out a survey, but please just be in touch and let us know, because we really want to do this. This is very cathartic for all of us, here, but we hope it is for you as well. And we want to build that space, that community, because like Sarah said, it's not always easy to find it where you live. A lot of these folks have been finding it on Instagram, but maybe we can build a space that also works for us to be in community. So I thank you all so much. Thank you so much to all the panelists today, John, Haley, Bud, and Anne for organizing everything. This was really fantastic. And we hope to see you guys next time.
Thank you. Have a great night, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you everyone in the chat. I can't respond back to the chat, but y'all are amazing. Everything
Yes,
you're saying.
yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining.